Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to this session. Thank you all for the time that you've put aside for this. Just like to acknowledge the fact that this session has been organised by ICRAF, the International Centre for Research in Agroforestry, or World Agroforestry, along with our colleagues in GIZ in Bonn and IUCN in Washington, DC. To get started, we've got two jumping off points for this meeting. The first is we're doing this remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And one thing that the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated to us is the susceptibility of our existing food systems. Around the world, we found that farmers found themselves separated from their sources of livelihood during lockdowns. Labor was disrupted, labor was dispersed, local value chains broke down, exports were disrupted because international trade was affected as a result of interruptions in transport. It's clear that the post-COVID recovery has to be much more resilient than the situation we've found ourselves in up to now. The second jumping off point for this session is that even before then, we knew we had to change. There was beginning to be a great deal of attention paid to the seriousness of the decline of our natural resources, and global efforts were underway to change the way that our economies work and our economies interact with the environment, and in particular with biodiversity. One effort is the review of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD, which is setting out a strategy for the period of 2020 to 2050. So what we're going to be discussing today is the need for agricultural landscapes to become biodiverse, to become biodiversity friendly, to become productive, and to become resilient. And we're going to bring in a number of excellent speakers who are going to take us through this. What we know is that our position is that we're pretty sure that agricultural systems are vital to the conservation of biodiversity, and food systems should increasingly be based on cutting-edge field-level technologies, which are based on ecological principles with an emphasis on local processing and distribution with shorter value chains. We believe that the CBD must recognize the importance of agricultural landscapes when setting its future strategy. We recognize that we need much better understanding of the productivity and profitability of integrated mixed farming. For 40 to 50 years, we have poured a huge amount of research effort into basically how to grow single crops more intensively. We lack the research to demonstrate and to make sure that integrated mixed farming can match the productivity and all of the with many other advantages. And we need to better understand the balance between global and national food supply chains. Now, what we're doing here, involved in putting this session together, are scientists. But what we've done today is we've brought together a number of very experienced practitioners who are going to take us through their experience in this field of mixed agriculture. I'll be introducing them one by one as we go along, but basically what we've done is we brought in a farmer from Northern Europe, we brought in an agricultural expert from India, getting into the tropics. We've brought in someone who works with the private sector. We've brought in an NGO, and we brought in someone representing central government at a very high level. So those are the people who are going to be taking us through a number of short presentations today. Now, our first presenter, unfortunately, cannot be with us. He's a farmer. He's a very busy man, and he hasn't been able to be here. But he is Peter Zenz. He is a German farmer. He farms near Cologne in Germany. In addition, he's the director of a voluntary project called Nutrition and Consumption, which is part of the Cologne Climate Council. And he and his farm is a member of an initiative with a very fascinating title, Biodiversity in Good Company. We asked Peter a couple of questions before he put together his video presentation. We asked him basically, as a European farmer with some very interesting ideas about the future of agriculture, just to tell us a little bit about his approach to farming and his approach to agriculture. We then challenged him with the observation that often a reason given for the lack of adoption of sustainable agriculture or organic agriculture is that it yields less than conventional approaches. It won't feed the world and farm incomes are low. We said to Peter, you're a practicing farmer, you practice circular agriculture, you practice sustainable agriculture. Could you tell us how you respond to this challenge? And if anything, what needs to change? And now we can roll the video with his response to this. Please, Trevor.
Herzlich willkommen hier bei mir auf dem Erlebnisbauernhof Gertrudenhof in Hürth bei Köln. Ja, wir sitzen hier mitten in unserer Kürbisscheune und die Kürbisscheune ist ein gutes Beispiel dafür, wie wir hier auf dem Gertrudenhof bei Köln unsere Landwirtschaft praktizieren. Saisonal, regional, nachhaltig, je nach Jahreszeit, immer das, was gerade auf unseren Feldern wächst, zeigen wir unseren Besuchern hier und vermarkten unsere komplette Ernte direkt in der Region zu Besuchern, die uns alltäglich besuchen. Das sind eben nicht 10, nicht 100, sondern das sind auch, zumindest vor Corona-Zeiten, an einem Wochenende oft auch einige tausend Menschen, die hier direkt aus der naheliegenden Großstadt Köln zu uns rausfahren, auf den Hof, Führungen auf unsere Felder machen, einkaufen hier in unserem großen Hofladen und auch die leckeren saisonalen Dinge dann auch direkt auf der Gabel genießen. Denn wir haben auch eine eigene Gastromeile, wo wir saisonale Gerichte anbieten, wie jetzt im Herbst in der Kürbiszeit, einen Kürbisflammkuchen, einen Kürbissekko gibt es dazu und viele weitere Dinge, die eben gerade aus der Jahreszeit dazu passen. Kürbissuppe darf natürlich auch nicht fehlen. Ja, und das ist was sich in den letzten Jahren bei uns so entwickelt hat, dass wir irgendwann gesagt haben, wir hören auf damit, für den Weltmarkt zu produzieren, wir hören auf damit, monokulturell nur einige Kulturen anzubauen und die über den Handel zu vermarkten, sondern wir bauen wieder eine Vielzahl an Kulturen an, über 30 das Jahr hinweg auf unseren eigenen Feldern, die wir geschlossen vermarkten über unseren Hofladen, in dem es natürlich auch noch eine Menge mehr zu kaufen gibt, hier aus der Region, von vielen Partnerhöfen, mit denen wir zusammenarbeiten und kooperieren. So hat der Kunde, Köln ist nicht weit, Köln eine Millionenstadt, mit vielen Familien natürlich, die vor allen Dingen unseren Hof besuchen, hier 7 Tage die Woche die Möglichkeit, frische, saisonale Produkte einzukaufen und eben auch die Landwirtschaft hautnah zu erleben, was ein ganz, ganz wichtiger Faktor ist, den ich sehe. Denn nur wenn die Menschen erleben, wie es wächst, wenn die Menschen den Unterschied kennenlernen, wenn die Menschen auch neugierig werden auf das, was gerade Saison hat, dann haben sie auch ein Interesse daran und dann kaufen sie es auch. Weil dann ist auch der Unterschied zum Supermarkt spürbar und erlebbar und das Essen wird mehr als ein Sattwerden, sondern etwas, worüber man erzählt. Und wenn man eben die Saisonalität spürt und schmeckt, bekommt man auch Lust darauf und muss das Ganze nicht ganz verkopft machen, sondern mit ganz viel Genuss und Freude. Und auch dafür werben wir in unserem Schulbauernhof. Vor Corona hatten wir etwa 1000 Führungen pro Jahr, wo wir Schulklassen, Kindergärten und auch Kindergeburtstage hier auf unseren Hof eingeladen und geführt haben, wo wir zusammen geerntet haben und bei jeder Führung auch immer die verschiedenen Dimensionen mit betrachtet haben. Zum einen eben, ja, was ist Landwirtschaft, wie funktioniert Landwirtschaft, wo sind die Probleme der Landwirtschaft, was sind die Zusammenhänge und die Schwierigkeiten, aber eben auch das Thema Lebensmittelverschwendung und nachhaltiger Konsum und was hat das ganze Einkaufen auch für eine Bedeutung für unser Klima. Denn wenn man mit einem Kind in der 1. Klasse schon die Kartoffel aus der Erde rupft und zusammen aushakt und man dann dem Kind sagt, welche Kartoffel würdest du wegschmeißen, dann ist jeder einzelne für ihn ein kleiner Schatz und das Kind sagt, keine würde ich wegschmeißen. Und genau da kann man anfangen und erklären, warum Lebensmittelverschwendung so ein Wahnsinn ist. Warum es so ein Wahnsinn ist, dass eben die zu kleinen, zu dicken Kartoffeln oft weggeschmissen werden. Warum es ein Wahnsinn ist, dass viele Verbraucher eben nicht auf Lebensmittel achten, weil der Preis nicht mehr der Wert ist, den es darstellt. Und so werden die Kinder dann schon zu Botschaftern der Nachhaltigkeit und tragen das in ihre Familien ein und kommen so auch oft zu uns wieder auf den Hof und zu uns einkaufen. Und ja, so ist das Ganze ein sehr geschlossenes System, was wir in den letzten Jahren aufgebaut haben. Wie gesagt, wo wir mit den Kindern schon anfangen, ihnen erzählen, was wir tun, und viele Eltern und Erwachsene dann mitkommen und neugierig werden auf uns und uns dann wieder und wieder besuchen, in unserem Hofladen einkaufen kommen, und wir es so geschafft haben, eben davon wegzukommen, für Europa und die Welt zu produzieren und stattdessen jetzt für die Menschen produzieren, die um uns herum wachsen. Nicht erwachsen, die um uns herum wohnen und die dann sehen können, wie alles wächst auf unseren Feldern. Und was da so abenteuerlich klingt und auch als Geschäftsmodell, was ja auch wichtig ist, weil eine Dimension der Nachhaltigkeit ist ja auch die Wirtschaftlichkeit, auch als Geschäftsmodell funktioniert, klingt so simpel wie abenteuerlich, denn es ist eigentlich nichts anderes, als mein Großvater vor 50 Jahren schon gelebt hat. Nämlich auch er hat eine Vielfalt von Kulturen angebaut hier auf dem Hof und hat es damals nur nicht direkt ab Hof verkauft, sondern ist eben mit den Waren in die Stadt gefahren, auf die Märkte, und hat es verkauft. Nur die Marktstruktur in der Großstadt ist eben nicht mehr so wie vor 50 Jahren. Auf den Märkten gibt es nur noch Händler, die auch gekaufte Produkte vermarkten, die meistens sogar noch nicht mal regional sind. Und so ist diese Vermarktungsform weggefallen. Es gab früher Erzeugergenossenschaften, wo man dann eben regional die Waren hingebracht hat und die dann regional weiterverteilt wurden an die vielen, vielen kleinen Händler. Auch die gibt es nicht mehr, sondern es gibt wenig Monopolisten, die den ganzen Marktsegment beherrschen. Und so ist diese ganze Struktur irgendwann zusammengebrochen und immer mehr Landwirte, so auch wir, waren gezwungen, immer weniger Kulturen, immer professioneller, immer größer anzubauen und damit aber eben immer monokultureller und mit weniger gutem Eintrag für Biodiversität. Und ja, wir haben es geschafft, in den letzten Jahren diesen Kreis zu durchbrechen, unseren Betrieb neu aufzubauen und eben diese andere Form der Landwirtschaft wieder zu etablieren, die so ein bisschen nahe dem ist, was mein Opa vor 50 Jahren gemacht hat. Und was auch dem nahe ist, was er gemacht hat, nämlich gut auf den Boden zu achten, den er beackert, zu wissen, was braucht der Boden, damit er gesund bleibt. Eben nicht Monokulturen, große Flächen, 6 Jahre lang dieselbe Kultur hintereinander, sondern eine mehrgliedrige, mehrjährige Fruchtfolge, wo der Boden auch immer wieder das zurückerhält, was er anschließend der Pflanze geben kann, damit sie gut wachsen kann. Dazu gehören blühende Zwischenfrüchte, wo wir eben den Boden gesund machen, aber auch unserer Flora und Fauna Gutes tun, weil diese blühenden Zwischenfrüchte sind natürlich ein richtiges Buffet für Bienen und Insekten, aber auch Schonung und Deckungsraum für Rebhühner und Hasen. Und ja, all das mussten wir wiederentdecken, damit eben ein Kreislauf entsteht, der eben Boden und Natur gesund hält und gleichzeitig uns verhilft, eben auch weniger Pflanzenschutz einzusetzen. Denn wenn Boden und Natur drumherum gesund ist, dann ist das auch möglich. Wenn man immer wieder hört, dass gesagt wird, dass eine nachhaltige Landwirtschaft die Welt nicht ernähren kann, werde ich immer ganz schön wütend. Denn das, was die Welt bestimmt nicht ernähren kann, ist, wenn global wenige Sorten von wenigen Firmen angebaut werden, die überhaupt nicht mehr angepasst sind an die Standorte. Das sortenfeste Saatgut, das seit Jahrhunderten, Jahrtausenden in verschiedenen Gebieten überliefert worden ist, das hält vielen, vielen Naturkatastrophen stand und sichert Ernten und Erträge vor Ort überall. Und ich glaube, diesen Schutz und diese Weiterentwicklung brauchen wir umso mehr. Und das kann gelingen, wenn auch die Ernte regional dort vermarktet wird, wo sie angebaut wird. Und dann kommt es eben nicht dazu, dass aus Europa noch anderen Teilen der Welt die Ernte weggenommen wird, weil sie herimportiert wird. Und dann muss es eben so passieren, dass überall dort Nahrungsmittel angebaut werden, die dort saisonal sind, weil dann sind die Erträge gut, dann braucht man wenig Pflanzenschutzmittel und dann hat man auch eine sichere Ernte und kann so viele, viele Menschen auch satt machen. Und der zweite Vorteil, den ich absolut sehe, ist von einer regionalen Vermarktung und von einer nachhaltigen Landwirtschaft ist, dass eben auch die ganze Ernte vermarktet wird. In der industriellen Landwirtschaft wird oft nur das vermarktet, was wirklich optimal gewachsen ist, wie aus der Maschine heraus, in der gleichen Form, gleichem Aussehen hat. Und alles andere, was dem nicht genügt, wird weggeschmissen. Viele, viele unserer Lebensmittel werden weggeschmissen, das wissen wir alle. Und wenn man diese Chance nutzt und all das, was im Moment in der Tonne landet, wieder auf den Teller bringt, dann, glaube ich, ist auch genug für uns alle da. Und deshalb hoffe ich, dass wir alle heute dazu beitragen können, dass eine regionale, nachhaltige Landwirtschaft, eine Kreislaufwirtschaft, eine Biowirtschaft vorankommt und die Menschen in der Welt wieder satter macht als heute.
An elementary mistake, I was muted, I apologize. Thank you again to Peter Zenz in his absence. I would remind you that as a farmer in Europe, where usually the incentive system associated with payments drives people down certain forms of agriculture. And this is a real heartfelt, passionate pitch, I thought, for different sorts of agriculture based on local value chains, based on local marketing, based on local production and variability. Now, that was a message from the north. Similar progress is being made in tropical countries, and we're finding places where mixed farming is proving to be successful, land is managed well, and biodiversity is being conserved. Our next speaker is Dr. Thomas Jacob. He's an advisor at Pyramid Development Society Organic Spices. He's had more than 40 years of professional experience in the field of production of various crops like rubber, spices, aromatics, medicinal plants, coffee, you name it. He's had more than 35 years of experience in the area of research and development administration. He's going to pick up very similar questions to Peter Zenz. Dr. Thomas, you're very welcome. Thank you for being here. Could you tell us, first of all, just in comparison with the northern example that we've just seen, can you tell us a little bit about the approach of PDS Spices and, in fact, yourself in terms of your long experience to managing the land, managing biodiversity, growing crops?
Thank you, thank you, Philip, and all the participants. In fact, though it's south and north, there's not going to be much difference as well as the issues of agriculture or farming is concerned. But in the south, where in India, India is a large country. Sure, can I have the PPT? Shiva? Yeah. So actually. We actually, our focus has been our small farmers. I mean, unlike what you have in north, we have the farmers, or rather the whole, in the tropics, we have the farmers are very small. If you take the India as a whole, almost 80% are small farmers. And if you come back to my next slide, Trevor. Now, if I come back to where I am, actually I am from the south, western down there, the small state of Kerala, and where the entire farmers are small farmers. That is 95% of the farmers are small farmers holding an average land area of 1 hectare. So that's what the small area. So our focus has been, action has been to support the sustainability of the small farmer. So we believe that, an intensive agriculture, if you look at this, we need always a multi-cropping system in a small land because his land holding is so small. So we ensure that there is always a multi-layer cropping system. If you look into the right side, our intention is to, harness all the natural resources to this fullest fullest. The top trees will harvest 100% light, and then it filters 75% light. Like that, in every story of life, we have a selection of plants that can tolerate that intensity of light and water. So if you have, different combinations with all the sustainable in the local area, sustainable food for the local area, as well as we cater to some of this product with very specialized product like spices for export. So if you feel that you have some material for your feed and for the local market, as well as you have something for the export market, you will bring little more money for the small farmer. So another thing is that we spread the risk of going for one crop because, the market always fluctuates. So once the fluctuation happens, you always have to, nullify the fluctuations. So we always look at, as far as wherever possible, wherever the water is there, we always go for integrated farming as well, not only the multi-state farming, wherein you introduce some poultry or cattle or sheep or fish, so that system also is a recycling soil health, manure and soil building system. So always we try to integrate a farming system. And the another focus we have been always looked at is that local problems have to be addressed locally. So we have been encouraging the farmers for as an innovator, and we have really encouraged our local farmers to come out with their own local varieties which can come in that particular soil and which has been carried over generations. And we find excellent varieties equivalent to any high yielding varieties released by a private or national institutions. You have most of the varieties that has come out in the locality are climate resilient farmer varieties. And along not only the varieties, we also started scouting for local technologies, farming technologies. Say, for example, last time we never had a solution for a rooting hormone, because every time you need a rooting hormone for a better generation. Then I find a small lady who has been using a moringa leaf as a rooting hormone for her cutting. So no, actually she got it just by observing his father. But wherever a rooting is needed, you find that the cuttings she used to keep, or the father used to keep on the moringa tree. So that then why she started, why this father is looking, keeping everything under the moringa tree. So then only you understand that some benefit of moringa leaf is coming for rooting in the plant, and we have made a rooting hormone from moringa leaf. And last time when in the organic internet IFOM, they wanted to see what is the solution for a rooting hormone. I said I have one from my own local farmer who has come out with a moringa leaf, this thing. So you find any problems, and for localized mechanization, they are the best to come out with solution. If you talk with them, they find the solution, and they find the problem and they are finding the solution. So we have been focusing on localization, and we have a program called as Land to Lab program. And there is where our localization comes, and through a biodiversity. Yeah, next slide, please. So all these machineries, and then what we see that we always developed an entrepreneurship. Whenever there is a small innovation, we see that it is made into an enterprise, so that the farmer get an additional income. So GIS said we have a project on behalf, and we promoted a lot of biodiversity. And here you find that you have vetiver grass. It is a very good, excellent soil conserving crop. And once you plant it on the contour, the leaves is normally used as mulch. But we again made it into a women enterprise prunership on baskets. So the leaves can be made into basket, and the woman is getting an additional income in the farm. So whatever we do, we try to bring some economics into the activity in the biodiversity. And here we use the women groups to come out with a small entrepreneurship on the innovations of machines and machinery, etc. So I think this is what we try to do, Philip, localized this thing. And again, the last slide would always say that, if the farmer is really connected to his customer, a farmer knows his customer and he will never poison his food. And if a customer knows the farmer growing his food, they will never bargain with him. So if our vision is to connect the farmer with the customer. I think that's what we have been doing all along, Philip.
Sounds like great wisdom indeed. Thank you very much. Just can you just sort of supplementary question? It's one of the questions, but we're going to have to move on. But before we move on to the next presenter, you could have just decided in most of these situations just to grow one crop where you have a decent market. Could you just very, very quickly give us an idea? Are you sacrificing profitability, or are you gaining profitability? And what other advantages are you getting through these superb and beautiful integrated systems that we've seen?
Actually, we are really balances out the economics. I mean, we don't find much of a, by integrating different, crops for the market and for the local market as well as for the export. We are not compromising on the economics. Well, maybe we may be compromising on the total productivity. You know, in an industrial agriculture, you look only for productivity, but we diversify so that the farmer almost get the same income like what you get from the industrial or intensive agriculture. And another thing is that because you diversify the crop, the litter and the leaves and the organic carbon that's added into the soil keeps the soil so healthy and sustainable for the long run. So that's the advantage we see it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you from the beautiful state of Kerala. We're talking about an agenda of change here. We're talking about moving on to a post-COVID world where we have biodiverse, friendly, sustainable agriculture with value chains that actually serve the customer much more effectively and in a much more resilient fashion than we've had up to now. If this shift is going to continue, if we're going to build back better, as a number of politicians are telling us we need to do, donors, NGOs and others will need to change the way that they provide their support to communities. It's going to be important to build on successful ways that commercial agriculture becomes sustainable, communities are built up, people benefit, and they're integrated into conservation efforts. We're now going to have a presentation from a very interesting company, which is called the Poor Project. We have with us Lorena Freer, who is a regional manager for Asia at the Poor Project. She's got she has a background, I beg your pardon, in international economics. She started working at Poor as a programs manager in charge of international accounts, such as Accor Hotels, a very, very big account, but also implementing agroforestry and sustainable agriculture programs in France and abroad. In other words, right on the ground with small communities. She's now moved to Bangkok to the regional office to take over the operations of management of their Asian field programs. So she's going to tell us a little bit about the interface between the value chains of commercial companies, communities, how the commercial companies are incentivized to improve biodiversity conservation with the communities along the way. Lorena, you're very welcome. Thank you very much indeed. So to start with, just tell us a little bit about how you do this. How do you work with the communities?
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for the detailed introduction and also for the question. So Pure Projet, we are a mission company, and our mission is to regenerate and protect ecosystems through community empowerment and supply chain strengthening. And to do that, for the last 12 years, we've been developing and operating more than 80 agroforestry and other nature-based projects with farming communities, mostly in tropical developing countries, so with smallholder farmers, but also now in North America, in Europe, in Australia, in that case, more with individual farmers, such as Peter Zins, who we heard just before. So we see ourselves more as catalysts or capacity builders or facilitators, which means that our role is not to teach or to impose or to do everything ourselves, but more to build local connections on the ground and to empower those people. So to make things a bit more concrete, in the case of an agroforestry project, we usually collaborate with farmer cooperatives who become our implementing partners. And then together we organize training sessions on agroforestry in villages. Then we also meet each individual farmer at their farm to see the configuration of the farm, to understand what their challenges are and what their reasons to plant is. This is very important to understand from the beginning. And then we're able to advise them on planting models that are relevant to their farms. Of course, we take into account their own local knowledge and their own wish, especially when it comes to local tree species to plant. And this provides us a database of farmers and species to deliver to them. So we also do the delivery of the tree seedlings and other inputs to the farmers, and then we do some monitoring on survival rates a couple of months after the plantation and 1 year after it. A big chunk of our projects are agroforestry projects, but depending on the needs of the communities, and that's something that we always assess prior to starting a project somewhere, we can also develop other activities such as gap trainings, beekeeping, forest conservation, sustainable husbandry. But the idea for us is really to respond to actual needs, to raise awareness and to build capacity for the farmers and for the local stakeholders so that they can continue to carry over the project even when Pure and its sponsors, which are commercial companies, are not in the area anymore or are not supporting the project anymore.
Okay, thanks so much indeed. Let's turn our attention a little bit to the links with companies. Tell me a little bit about how you work with commercial companies and how you ensure that they contribute to the well-being of people and to the protection of natural resources while making a profit.
Right. So our model was built on the very idea to engage the private sector in a meaningful way and to show that there is a business case in investing in the producing landscapes you source from, in helping the farmers shift towards more diversified farming system and restoring their ecosystem. Why is that? Because intensive monocultures have worked for a while, but now soils are depleting, yields are decreasing, and with the accelerating effects of climate change, it's not looking good, especially from, especially from a purchasing aspect, if we take the viewpoint of a company. So that's why we've pioneered with the in-setting approach that we promote to companies, which means compensating the environmental impact of your operations, but within your own value chain. And you do that not only for a carbon benefit, otherwise you could just buy carbon credits on the market. It's straightforward and probably cheaper. No, you do that for the overall supply chain resilience and for sustained supplies over the time. So what we bring to these commercial companies are analysis of their supply chains, which includes assessment on the ground, meeting local stakeholders to understand what the key challenges are at community and landscape level, and trying to find together actions that we can undertake to address those challenges. Then, of course, we would be the one operating this with the local partners that we have identified. But here the approach is really to have a holistic view, so to look at social, environmental, and business aspects to make sure that everybody benefits from the initiative. It's a lot of promoting medium to long-term approaches with not so automatic results and a lot of uncertainty, because we're working with nature, we're not building cars. So sometimes it can seem a little bit at the opposite of the short-term approach of businesses, but to be honest, we do see a positive change, a positive trend. More and more companies really make the link between healthy producing landscapes and their own survival. And yeah, there's definitely a lot happening in the food and beverage and cosmetics industries, which rely a lot on raw materials such as cacao, coffee, vanilla, patchouli, you name it. But there's also positive trends in other sectors, for sure.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much indeed. So where do we go in the future? What are your challenges? If we want to see the benefits of Pure's work expanded, if we want to see this becoming more the norm than the uphill battle we've had for so many decades, what should we be doing? What's your advice?
Well, for sure, something quite tricky in our work is that our vision is about long-term. It takes time to build capacity. It takes time for mindsets to change. It takes time for trees to grow, to sequester the carbon, to actually restore the soils. So our commitment to the communities and the farmers is actually of decades. That's, you know, the kind of benefits that we socialize to them when we present the potential project. Whereas companies would tend to commit to support a project over a couple of years, and with some level of flexibility, sometimes depending on the financial health of the company. And we're seeing that definitely right now with the COVID situation. So yeah, it's definitely a bit hard sometimes to navigate those different time horizons, but our role as project developers and with my team, when we have to design a project, we have to think of those activities that we think are necessary in the future if we want the impacts to be sustained, if we want the trees to be kept on farm, if we want farmers to actually have market opportunities for the agroforestry co-products. And we need to think already of the budget that we need to provision from what we get from the companies, so that those activities can be funded in the long term. So that's one point. A second point is that our model is to work with individual companies to develop projects in their supply chains. Now, even in ambitious, great company programs, the reach in terms of beneficiaries or budget is sometimes just not enough to properly address the issues at landscape or regional level. So we'd really like to see and even catalyze more sectorial or regional approaches to action, a little bit like what the Cocoa and Forest Initiative is doing in West Africa. So it doesn't have to be the same scale necessarily, because this is a huge initiative, but in general, I think it'd be very great and powerful to see more collaboration at pre-competitive level between companies. And yeah, basically the idea is that a supply chain on its own cannot solve all the issues entailed by climate change or ecosystems degradation. So we definitely need to see more collaboration and scale. And by the way, on this topic, we are currently exploring the opportunity to develop a multi-stakeholder initiative in Southeast Sulawesi, Indonesia. So if you are in the area and interested, feel free to reach out and we can discuss about it. The more the merrier, as we say. And lastly, I would say that the challenge that you already mentioned, Phil, in your intro is that it takes a while to observe the impacts of nature-based solutions. So despite the fact that we've been around for many years, we still don't have a lot of scientific data on our projects, for example, on yields under agroforestry systems, whereas this type of data, I feel, would be key to convince even more farmers to engage in agroforestry or other practices. It would be, because of course there's still a lot of reluctance to changing completely the farming model. It would also be key for companies to safely engage in this type of program. And of course, it would also be key to convince policymakers that this approach to farming is to be supported. So yeah, I think we share really like this, this observation, and yeah, I really much agree with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much indeed for that fascinating presentation. We're getting a number of questions coming in, which are being passed to me. There's although we, the presenters, are rather separate from the actual question and answer session, I gather there's a very energetic exchange of questions going on. Perhaps I could just pass a couple of them to some of the speakers who have already spoken before going on to the next one. I'll just pick two of them out from Ian Dawson. And I might come straight back to, perhaps I'll go to Thomas on this one, if I may. It's a question of transaction costs. We're talking about transformation of agriculture, which is in many places set itself into a certain pattern, and we're hoping that it might transform itself into a different pattern. This is going to involve a great deal of transaction costs in the sense of acquiring knowledge, in the quest of learning how to do things, in the sense of modifying value chains and all sorts of things. Do you have any comments on how do we minimize those transaction costs? Is it a matter of scalability? Is it a matter of the need for some subsidy to come in to help us with transaction costs? What's your view, Thomas?
In fact, it's a matter of scalability. Supposing we are able to scale up your this philosophy of sustainability. There are a growing concern all over the world where we can also link with the world outside, so that they are also willing to, the customers are also willing to support the real cost of transactionability. I mean, actually, one advantage we have, of course, we deal with high cost or high value crops like spices, where we command a large international market for that. And so the farmers are, the whole customers absorbs most of the cost on transparency and customization. So I think if the customers are willing, you find a better customer willingness and also scaling up. We have more than 3,000 farmers. So once you scale up from a small 100 to thousands of farmers, your transaction costs are going to be much, much lower. That's what our experience is. And of course, it's a long process. It takes around 8 to 10 years if you want to really stabilize it out. But you will succeed because the world is going towards that.
Okay, right. Thank you very much indeed. I think actually in the interests of time, thank you very much indeed, Thomas, for coming in on that question. In the interest of time, we'll push ahead. And now we're going to talk to someone who works with an NGO, but a very interesting NGO, which, as I understand it, has a foot in the conservation camp, if I can put it that way, and a foot in the agricultural productivity camp. And here I think our whole discussion is about how do we get biodiversity-friendly systems into agricultural landscapes. So we have with us today Tobias Luthers, who is a program manager for business and biodiversity at the Global Nature Fund. He collaborates worldwide, and in issues of food standards, he works with food companies to improve biodiversity criteria in standards and in procurement systems. So Tobias, over to you.
Well, thanks, Phil, for this introduction, and thank you for having me. I do work for the Global Nature Fund. The Global Nature Fund itself, it's an NGO about 20 years old. Now, having this NGO, we do have different branches. And one branch that at the moment is quite successfully going on is actually the branch that is called Business and Biodiversity. And you may already know it's business and biodiversity. So it's all about the link between those two sectors. And more the focus in this branch is going to the food sector. Now, in 2016, a team, or a couple of NGOs, we have had a look at procurement guidelines and we have a look at standard criteria. And we found while many stakeholders want to target biodiversity in agricultural production, well, the content of how they do this, there was room for improvement. Let's put it like this. Now, starting from then, we have had a live project, actually several projects, but the latest one is a live food and biodiversity project in which we, on one hand, further had a look at standards and company procurement guidelines, but also in which we closely collaborated with those stakeholders to find out together what are the best practices that can be implemented into agricultural production systems all over the world, and what actually is what the market can do, where are the limits and where are the possibilities. And you already said it, the leverage in this case, it is the criteria and procurement guidelines. So when the market source, they often give some frame data on how something shall be produced, And there's actually the point where we targeted. Now, out of this came really in a beneficial way, and the momentum it generated was even surprising for us. And you have heard the other speakers that at this time there is a certain keenness of the market to go towards biodiversity-friendly farming. And so it is also with international standards and with the companies as source internationally. While having a lot of different recommendations given over the years, there's this one, but let me put it like this one really meaningful, most important, or the one recommendation that hit the ground hardest. And this was one that is called Biodiversity Action Plan. Now, we actually recommend companies and food standards to implement a management plan for biodiversity protection on farm level. And this management plan is called Biodiversity Action Plan. Now, it sets a focus on farm level, so it actually is a tool provided to farmers, a method provided to farmers to implement biodiversity actions, to set up a baseline on what is the situation of those farmers, to find out the most crucial aspects to be targeted, and then go and implement biodiversity measures to actually target the challenges that are there in the region or on the local farm. And this methodology is scalable. We actually did it in different countries all over the world. Our partner organizations are doing it quite successfully in Europe and also in other places in the world. So we, over the last 3 years, found out that there is room for scaling up, and there's a possibility. And it's not that we do not know how. It is often that we just don't do it. So based on the Biodiversity Action Plan, there has also been other developments that support this plan. So we introduced something that is called a Biodiversity Performance Tool. And this is an online-based tool that helps companies, but farmers, to generate a biodiversity action plan. Now, the sad thing about all of this is that the Live Food and Biodiversity project ended now in September, but as all partners have been quite busy, in all national partners, so in all companies and organizations, we supported the implementation of national biodiversity initiatives, so that the idea of collaboratively tackling this issue does not end with the project. And I would just like to focus on one point. One point, that is the German Biodiversity Initiative in the food sector. And in this initiative, front-runner stakeholders actually are forming right at this moment in time and building a collaboration and going public with this, hopefully at the beginning of 2021, saying that biodiversity is the topic to jointly work on. It is not always the topic to actually fight over, but to tackle in a collaborative approach. And here we are really keen to see how this is going to develop, not only in Germany, but also in other countries. This is what we do, and I think we have great times ahead, although I also think that we have great challenges coming for us.
Tobias, thank you very much indeed. I followed that very well. Actually, your sound has been breaking up. I just want to, I'd just like to check with our technical support whether that was a general problem that other people are having, or was it coming out for all of the feeds? Trevor, how did that sound? No,
I think there was
it came through a little bit gargledy, but we can just carry on.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much. Yes. So, sorry to interrupt there, Tobias. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was able to hear what you were saying. It sounds as though it's getting through. I think you've answered one or two of the questions that we were going to ask you. Perhaps if it's not repetitive, could I just ask you? You've got a lot of experience out there, and this is going to relate to one of the questions which the audience has posed, which I'll repeat as soon as you've replied to this. What about obstacles? What has to change? Where do you find that your work really is very difficult to put into practice? What do we have to do that is different, that is new? Tell us a little bit about your what you think in this respect.
Yes. Obstacles. Well, obstacles, they are diverse, and you will find specific ones in every farming system and place around the world. But there are a few ones that are international. So one of which, and I do think it is the most pressing to target, is lack of motivation to adapt. But let me put it that way, it's not lack of motivation. Most of the cases, it is lack of knowledge. So we found that you have a certain set of methods to motivate farmers. One is it's regulation. So it's actually right now what we all do and hope with the European agriculture policy, so that there is politicians setting a frame and giving a road to follow. The other one is market, so it's all about money. So when a farmer actually does something, first question in many cases is, what does it cost? How much less yield is it causing? Who's going to pay for that? This is oftentimes short-term thinking, and when you start collaborating with a farm, and we actually did it with over 70 farms all across Europe, then you find out that the more farmers in general get to know about agroecological practices, for example, the fewer the obstacles are, so the more they are willing to implement and try out. So I do believe that knowledge sharing and training is the most and biggest obstacle. And why? Because it is the farmer him or herself that actually has access to farming land. And we all acknowledge that farming land itself is a habitat in itself that developed over centuries, that has their own species, that has their own rules and frames. And if we want to actually get our grip on this farming land, then it can only be through farmers. And farmers, them or themselves, are also the biggest catalyst for this change, for the adoption of biodiversity-friendly measures in farming. So rolling out can short-term be done by market and politics, but long-term, definitely it's a farmer who's playing the critical role.
Okay.
So Phil, did this answer your question?
It does. It goes a long way to answering the question. We're having some slight technical problems with your feed, but it got through. Thank you very much indeed. And you put a lot of emphasis in that on knowledge and training, and that goes back to the question that that Ian Dawson asked before about the transaction costs of transforming to an agriculture of this kind. There's another question which has come through from two people, Esther Milberg and Lise van der Mere. Very simple questions, and they're wondering how farmers can invest in diversifying their fields and creating a farmer-led resilient food systems without secure land tenure and access, and policies that support localized food systems instead of globalized ones. I think they're talking particularly about the African context, where land tenure is often not secure. Do any of the speakers want to come back and say anything about the interaction between land tenure, the security that people have to be able to invest in their land, and the willingness to transform into the sort of agriculture that we've seen being practiced through the speakers today? Do we have any volunteers to answer that question? That's a great shame. That's a great shame.
No. I think I will take that. Philip?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
I mean, can you just repeat the crunch of the question again? About this is the African.
The crunch of the question is, and we see this a lot in Africa, is the unwillingness of farmers to invest in change if they don't have security of tenure over the land. And the security of the tenure might be because they simply do not have legalistic systems in, or the plural legal systems, which make it difficult for the farmers to be sure that they're going to be able to use the land. Or it might be something banal, that the land is becoming so subdivided that it's not worth investing at the end of the day. Do you have any experience of that from India?
No, we need to have the land registered. But then what I would still, again, as a visionary, I would say that, of course, if the land ownership definitely remains if it all issue, why can't the farmers have a larger consolidation of a particular product, a short-term product of an annual product which could be marketable, rather than looking for a long term? Because normally when you take into this, you need a longer time, 5 years minimum, for sustainable system. But since you have issues on land, and then you don't have money, or rather it's not worth investing for a long-term program, I would always think that we could consolidate more farmers and go for a short-term crops. I mean, that's just my wild suggestion rather than experienced knowledge.
Okay, consolidation and turnaround.
Right.
Thank you very much. The question that was posed there is without doubt a very important question. Perhaps in the chat this is being dealt with. We'll come back to it when we can. We'll move on to our final speaker now, and we're very privileged to have with us a very senior government representative from the Indian government, Dr. Alka Bhargava, and I trust I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Doctor. She's an additional secretary in the Department of Agricultural Cooperation and Farmers Welfare. Her primary responsibilities include overseeing the works associated with natural resource management, international cooperation, integrated nutrient management, and rain-fed systems. She's had a long and very, very interesting career. She's done a lot of things, including being a Fulbright scholar at Michigan State University. But I'm going to jump right to the last line of the bio that I have in front of me. She strongly believes that sustainable agriculture and conservation are the two sides of the same coin, with a strong ripple effect on the lives of people residing therein. In other words, we have a senior government official here who really sees the value of sustainable agriculture and conservation. You're very, very welcome, Dr. Alka.
Thank you so much.
Just so we're going to jump back to what we said at the beginning, because you're right in the middle of policy making and policy for change. Can I ask you, what changes would you like to see happening in Indian agriculture as we start to recover from this COVID pandemic? You might want to comment on the impacts that it's had on Indian agriculture and how it's affected particularly the poor people. But your views of what you'd like to see changing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good evening to everyone. It was great listening to the various views of the previous speakers, and wherever you are across the continent, I think the issues are the same and the ways of tackling them are also the same. So when, I mean, right now the world is grappling with a very peculiar kind of situation. And if I talk of our experience in India, I mean, the first time the lockdown was announced was on 23rd March 2020. So like Phil, you asked what should be done after this in a post-COVID scenario. I'll just take about 5 minutes to dwell upon what we did during this period, so that, I mean, with great pride, we say that most of the farming operations just carried on very, very normally. So when this was first declared on the 23rd March, it took exactly just 3 days for the government to, I mean, give the exemptions to all farming operations as per the set calendar. And everything just went off as normally as possible. Because the first thing that was worrying us was the standing crops in the field. So harvesting was the major first concern for us. And of course, I mean, all this was done in the backdrop of detailed SOPs to the states to adhere to health protocols and social distancing norms, etc. So, I mean, all the harvesting was carried on as was completed without any glitch. The second issue was that we have a short summer sowing seasons starting around May, June, July. So for that, all the inputs had to be sent to the farmers, including seeds, fertilizers, etc. And very well done. This also was because the sowing of summer crops was done in 6.8 million hectares, which was 1.7 million hectares more than the previous year. So again, I mean, credit to our farmers. And then another issue was when we talk about social distancing, our wholesale markets are major places of absolutely congested places to work in. So that decongestion of the wholesale markets was another issue which we had to tackle immediately, because once the harvesting was being done, they were going to the wholesale markets. So how do you get people to remain healthy but carry on their transactions? So here we, in fact, some of our audience may be aware that India had quite rigid systems of the farmers being able to take their produce to the nearest wholesale markets, or perhaps a couple of them close by. With, I mean, there were state laws. I mean, agriculture in India is a state subject. So these were governed by our Agriculture Produce Marketing Committee Acts, which had been promulgated in the states in the 70s and the 80s. So, I mean, we encouraged the state governments to take out orders or ordinances to allow direct marketing. So a lot of states came forth for that, because that was the only way the farmers could sell their produce outside these wholesale markets, from the farm gates or cold storage or warehouses or wherever possible. Except, I mean, wherever required, they could come to the markets, but otherwise dispose of most of the stuff directly to the buyers. So this was another thing which we could tackle. And then coming to the logistics, an app was immediately launched within days almost, of like an Uber system of tracking your the nearest truckers and the other logistic transporters providers. So that came in handy. Again, a lot of digital backup was taken into for coming over this period of our initial period of lockdown. And of course, the electronic national agriculture market, which was launched way back in 2016, sorry, that also came into the play, because then, like our farmer producer organizations, they could upload their produce on the eNAM portal, bid and receive payments from the collection centers without having to bring it to the markets. So this was another way of decongesting the markets. Then coming to logistics, our Indian Railways, which has perhaps the largest network of railways across the country, I mean, they came to the help by starting special trains for carrying the horticulture produce, other perishables, and as well as the input supply for the forthcoming sowing season. So all this, I mean, and these trains are continuing now, because in the name of the farmer rails, we call it Kisan Rail in Hindi. So these are still continuing for carrying on I mean, connecting the production places to the consumers. So these all kind of benefited us and made us go through that, especially the initial period of COVID. And happily, when it was also mentioned that exports were struck because of various logistics and all, but happy to inform also from India, I mean, the exports during April to September last year, and this year in 2020, there was an increase of 43% over the same period last year. So, I mean, we did facilitate agriculture exports also to go on as close to normal as possible. And this, I mean, this is how, and this is what we're going to continue now in the coming years. And during this period also, during these 3, 4, 5 months, there was a mission launched by our Honorable Prime Minister, which in Hindi is called Atmanirbhar Bharat, which means a self-reliant India mission. And in this, there was a number of components which were announced, special packages, and then there was another acronym announced, which was called Vocal for Local, which has also been spoken about when we talk about agro-biodiversity. Stress on local fruits, local vegetables, millets, local farming systems, traditional knowledge, cropping patterns, all coming back to our roots, so that it becomes easy for the farmers also to do agriculture, and it is also kind of eco-friendly or environment-friendly. And here again, I mean, there is a lot of emphasis in the country on organic foods. And in fact, we are portraying India as a health and organic food destination in the coming years. Because during these 4 months, we've seen a steep increase in demand for organic foods, both in the domestic markets as well as for exports. And countries which were not known to be our destination for organics has been, calling on India for a supply of more and more of organic foods. So this is where, again, it becomes very good for health of the environment also. And then there were a couple of policy measures, acts, which were promulgated during this period for facilitating an actual national agriculture market for India, where the farmers could sell from anywhere across the, within the state or across the country in any state. And the other way, the buyers could also buy without any licenses from anywhere across the country, except that they had to have we have a income tax paying number. So if they have that card, then they could transact across the country. So it's a kind of a win-win situation through these 3 very important farming acts we promulgated in these 2 months. And also the second one is of contract farming, so that the farmers can get advisories on what to grow and where to grow and how much to grow in the way of pre-sowing farming agreements with the sponsor, which includes also provision of services. So there, I mean, it's a win-win situation for both the farmer as well as for the buyer or the industry or the processor, so that they can get exactly that quantity, that quality, and of material which they require. And the farmer also gets a assured price and an assured buyer. So these were some of the things which happened. And because we are now self-sufficient in all food grains except oilseeds, and horticulture is also growing rapidly. So now, from a food deficit country, we are faced with the situation of surpluses and becoming a major agri-exporter, agri-produce exporter. So our focus is now more on post-harvest management. So that is where, Phil, where you ask is what we want to do now next is, we've done the production. So now we want to help the farmers as well as the industry by strengthening our post-harvest management systems. So Ministry of Agriculture is working very closely with the Ministry of Food Processing Industry and the Department of Agriculture Research, so that their entire agri-value chain is taken care of, right from the right varieties, new varieties, climate resilient varieties, and the processable varieties. And we produce along with the farmers and then take it over to the Ministry of Food Processing, where a major emphasis on strengthening the processing capacity in the country. So this was all, done during the COVID period, and we want to take it forward. And then also an agri-infrastructure fund has been announced just last month, a $13 billion fund, where the major emphasis is on strengthening of post-harvest infrastructure, primary processing, cold storages, cold chains, etc., packing, sorting, grading systems. And here, anyone could apply for this fund and they get an interest subvention of 3%. So it approximately in India terms, it comes to around 5%. So which is a big, solace for the investors, because, this in fact, if, this is open to other countries also if they want to come and invest in India, they can take advantage of this agri-infra fund. So this was in a nutshell of what we did during this period, and we want to take it forward and strengthen it further. Coming back to our local fruits, local vegetables, and agro-biodiversity, and also happy to inform that we want to bring back the millets in a big way. And this was, I mean, earlier they were used to be called as coarse grain or coarse cereal. So in 2017, we renamed it as nutri-cereals, because they're actually very good for health, good for the environment, and good for the farmers, because low inputs are required. So also, I mean, India proposed to FAO, and FAO conference has endorsed a proposal for an international year of millets in 2023. And so that will be a big thing, not just for India, but for the entire Southeast Asia and for the African countries. Because once the millets are back, I mean, on the plates of the urban people and for exports, the farmers will be incentivized to grow them. And we're wanting to bring these also in our school feeding programs, our take-home rations for the prenatal and the postnatal mothers and for the infants, so that they come back to the roots and fulfill their nutrition. And along with this, we also have a lot of biofortification, biofortified varieties, and also fortification of rice, which we're also doing in consultation with ICR, the Agriculture Research Institute, as well as with the World Food Program, who had come up with the fortified rice. They've done some trials in our eastern state of Odisha, and they're bringing it to other states also. So that was in a nutshell of what we've done during the COVID and what we don't want to do beyond. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. You've covered just about everything there. That was absolutely fantastic. And perhaps we come into these discussions sometimes a little bit defensive, saying, how do we make things happen? It's very refreshing to find a country where things are happening, where things are moving, where things are changing. I'm going to just pause a little bit in your presentation, if I may, just to say to the audience, there's going to be about 15 minutes left for questions and answers. So please use the chat function, get questions into the speakers. If you can direct them to specific speakers, all the better. They will be passed to me, and I will pass them on to the speakers. But I'd just like to pull a couple of things out of Dr. Alka's presentation there, and they're a little bit random, I apologize, but the sort of thing that came up was, as a result of the crisis, a lot of deregulation, making it possible for farmers to do things that they couldn't do before. This is policy moving quickly to react to a situation. Digital solutions. The Uber solution, which you've heard of before, and we found this in a lot of other countries. People are now starting to look at value chains and wonder, how can we use modern communications to make our value chains more effective? And this is something that can last beyond the COVID pandemic. The reintroduction of land races that were before, particularly the millets that you spoke about, very important. We see this coming up in different countries under different guises. What I'd like to say, trying to in some way pull this all together, is that your focus on the post-harvest situation, very apt. Especially in developing countries, the level of post-harvest wastage, as we know, is very high, but it's taking you really from the agricultural production into the value chain. And what I would like to stress is that a lot of the time, we shouldn't just be talking about agriculture, we should be talking about food systems. And if we want to see post-COVID change, we need to see that change throughout the system. Now, let's go into the realm of negotiations and politics. If you could just tell us in 2 minutes, please. We know that the negotiations are going on in the Convention for Biodiversity. And those of us who are involved in that are very aware that in the framework that's being put together for the period up to 2050, from 2020 to 2050, there are 20 targets, and only one of those deals with agriculture. And agriculture so far is not really being seen as a habitat for conservation of biodiversity. Do you have any comments on this, Doctor? And do you think we should be looking for a specific agriculture target in the CBD negotiations?
In fact, there may be just one direct target for agriculture, but India's national biodiversity targets, we've got 6 targets which impinge agriculture. Like, I mean, I won't read it out because of positive time, but I mean, we are moving in the kind of targets are set or not. I mean, whether they are there in the post 2020 scenario, but we are moving in that direction of agro biodiversity and agro ecosystems. Because post our green revolution of the 70s and the 60s, we did manage to get food self-sufficiency, but then there have been certain deleterious effects also. So that is how we are changing to, we are crop diversifying, targeting rice fallows, and that's how we improved our pulses production. And then most important is that we are now planning our cropping systems as per the agroclimatic zones. We've got 15, I mean, India is huge. So whatever we do is on scale. So 15 agroclimatic zone wise cropping we're going to start, and taking into account the soil health and water use, because agriculture is the biggest drawer of water. So that is where, I mean, we would fit in exactly into the CBD entire targets which they have. They may not be having targets especially for agriculture, but we want to do it on our own because it is important for our national targets. So our National Biodiversity Authority, and we are working very closely along with the Ministry of Environment of how we can kind of make agriculture more sustainable, because only then, if we have agriculture, sustainable agriculture just impinging our protected areas, then only the conservation can work. And in this context, I would like to also refer to the landscape approach which we are adopting in a number of our projects. I mean, the states have their own, but the national projects, one reference I could do is for the JET 6 project, where 5 states are participating. And it's a very kind of a very sensitive landscape we've taken. One side are protected areas and national parks, and the adjoining villages. So the conservation and development will need to go together. Then we've also got it, we got a tea project going on, under discussion. So again, the landscape approach comes in agro-biodiversity, agroecology.
Thank you very much indeed, and I look forward to that discussion coming up in the next subster of the CBD, we look forward to those arguments being carried forward. I have a number of questions here. I'm not sure who they should all be aimed at, but thank you very much indeed, Dr. Alka, for rounding off this from the position of a central policymaker. Jessica Carvajal, I'm not sure who this question is aimed at, so I'm going to ask Lorena if she would. Oh, no, sorry, it's a different one. It's Evelyn Roman. I'll come back to Jessica in a moment. And it is to Lorena. The question is, what size of companies do you work with? And how do you approach them to promote sustainability? I think the root of this is this a marginal thing you do with small companies, or are you bringing the big girls and boys in?
Right. So we actually do work with many types of different size of companies. But it's true that if you want to work in your supply chain and implement multi-year initiatives, it requires some level of budget to be able to get the resources there, etc. So for those, I would say, large supply chain programs, we tend to be approached by companies that are of a significant size. But we also have some programs that are aimed at smaller sized companies when it comes to planting trees or supporting projects that are not directly within your value chain or your supply chain. There is also some projects that we have where companies can have a positive impact and support farmers in an area or in a commodity that they feel they relate to. And the way to build those sustainability programs for, I would say, the big ones, it's a lot of work since the beginning to understand also what are the challenges that the company itself is experiencing, and what are already existing elements of their either purchasing strategy or carbon strategy. And based on that, we can build something. But again, before we start a project for a company, we will always conduct feasibility assessments on the ground, really meeting the actors of the supply chain. So that means the farmers, the head of villages, the local authorities, NGOs that are already present in the area and potentially already working with those communities to really make sure that we have an actual vision of what's happening there and what to implement that is relevant.
So it's an integrated effort, not just a one-off in the middle of a desert. Thank you very much indeed. The other question, Tobias, if I may aim this at you, with apologies. It's from Jessica Carvajal, and I'm going to slightly paraphrase it, Jessica, if I may, because it's an issue which has been coming up in our conversations quite a lot. The question is, how can we promote different patterns of consumption and different diets when most people don't have access to alternatives due to a number of socio-economic and political issues? Now, let me put this into a context that I know has been discussed quite a lot, which is for a long time, we've been pushing supply of food. We've been trying to get people sufficient calories and protein to get rid of starvation. And now we've suddenly realized that we need to be much more interested in the quality of food. And we have value chains out there, which basically have been set up to provide carbon staples to a lot of people all the time. Is this something that you'd like to express an opinion on? How do you go about making that change when you've got systems locked in place already?
Okay, yeah, thanks for this question. First of all, do you understand me better now than it was beforehand?
It's certainly better.
Certainly, okay, so great. Honestly spoken, there's no simple answer to that question. Systems are stuck in place in all types and areas, and what developed over decades cannot simply turn around in days and weeks. So it is what the colleagues of mine prior to me also stated. It definitely needs time, it definitely needs passion, it definitely needs communication, a lot of communication. And then you have two choices. One is the bottom-up approach. This may work, and if it works, it's a more sustainable way. And the other way is actually top-down approach, and there you can also argue whether food systems or sustainability needs this or that way. But it takes time. There's not this one single way to go, although I do feel communication about the benefits of local production, benefits of nutritional aspects, benefits of biodiversity. If this comes into place and is broadened, this may do a lot.
Okay, you broke up and disappeared right at the very end there, but we got your message.
Okay.
The timing was almost perfect. And I would add to that, of course, it needs a shift in investment as well. We have to spend our money differently from the way we've been spending it up to now. We got a question to Thomas. Thomas is, I'm not sure who it's from. But it's the question is, thank you for your wonderful contribution. Those enterprises and entrepreneurs, who are they producing for? Are there incentives to integrate these into the local food systems? I think it's a question about the market that you're supplying. Was it there? Did you have to create it? Any comments you have?
In fact, we created local markets for, we did a lot of work on the consumer side. We worked with the consumer on the local market to, sensitize the importance of the biodiversity enriched product. And also we have two-pronged action, one for the export and one for the local market. And so all the exports, it's very easy because already the world is going on that particular line. So it is easy to align with the world movement, but we have problems with the local markets. But in this part of the world, in the country, and especially after post-COVID, there is a great realization on food as as a medicine. So rather than in the right way that you have food and have medicine. So that philosophical change has made it more easy to consolidate the farmer innovations. We always have a farmer groups being called as aggregators, and we handhold them. So the only primary thing is that you need a strong institution to connect the farmer to the consumer. So you need that, and that is where if that institutional support is not there, it always breaks up. So in our case, PDS being a strong institution, we were able to find markets and entrepreneurship, or rather we encourage entrepreneurship whenever there is an opportunity. One thing is that for all small innovations, say for example, a variety, what we do is that particular variety, we try to name him in his family name, so that variety gets a family name. And that gets really circulating among the local community. So this way we introduce the entrepreneurship and make it a successful endeavor.
Thank you very much. And a very important word came up there, which I was waiting to hear. It was aggregator. When we're talking about food systems, when we're talking about farmers being effectively linked to markets, to consumers, the role of aggregators is tremendously important. And thank you for bringing that up. We're going to go back to Lorraine again, and I think we're going to have to do this fairly quickly in 2 minutes if we're not to run over. But the question is, how are farmers generally supported by your project and local stakeholders when considering improved farm management practices and social/economic conditions? The key question here is, would you mind sharing an example? Just to round us off, could you just give us a little example of where this works and what you'd like to tell us? 2 minutes.
Right. Just is it possible to hear the last bit of the question, especially when I didn't hear it?
Yeah, it was basically is how are farmers generally supported by your project, and how are local stakeholders supported by your project, and would you mind sharing an example?
Right. Well, which project to choose? Well, if I can choose a project from my own region, we have an initiative that started various years ago in Thailand, in northeast Thailand, Isan region, which is the main producing region for rice. Here we helped a company, first L'Oreal actually, to develop a supply chain of sustainable rice bran oil. And rice bran is actually an unused co-product of rice production. So building this supply chain was actually just using already what was there, but trying to link together the actors to find another way to use this co-product, and then to generate additional incomes for the farmers. And by establishing this supply chain, we also implemented solidarity sourcing principles. So that means fair price paid to the farmers, and also longer term commitments in terms of purchasing. On top of that, we also support the farmers in implementing agroforestry. So it might seem a little bit weird to do agroforestry in rice because it's a sun-loving crop, but actually there's space along the dikes around the parcels to plant trees. So how it would work, we work with rice farming cooperatives that are in the region. And so with those farmer cooperatives, we hire technicians, agronomists that are local and that are going to be able to operate the project on a day-to-day basis. So we collaborate with these technical people to then establish or organize training sessions on agroforestry, the main principles of agroforestry and the benefits, then also on planting techniques and how you maintain a tree right after having planted it to keep the moisture, etc. And also more long-term management, how to prune the trees, etc. So it's really like a progressive approach to help farmers have a bit more faith in planting trees in their farms where it's not always so obvious for them to do so.
Okay, I'm going to thank you very much indeed. We are running over. I don't really want to get the wrath of the organizers by taking this a lot longer. I've just had a message here. If I can find it again. We have 937 people listening now, so tremendous interest out there. I do apologize to the people whose questions we didn't get to. We will go through them and we'll try to send them to the place where they should go. We've had some expressions of real interest in our German farmer Peter's presentation. We can't get him to respond now, obviously. He's not here, but we'll make him aware that he had an impact upon this audience. There's never enough time to discuss a topic like this, but I really do want to thank the speakers. They've given us a tremendous insight. And what I want to stress here is what we set out to do was not talk about the theory of the desirability of moving post-COVID to more integrated mixed farming, which is biodiversity friendly, which provides ecosystem services and all of the things which we need. We didn't want just a lecture on that. We wanted to get some people who really knew what they were talking about. And I'm very grateful for every panelist who has given his or her time to this meeting, for giving us such a rich indication of what is really happening out there, which gives us fantastic confidence that we're moving in the right direction. We're not wasting our time. And if we can put our efforts behind you panelists, we'll do our very best. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to the audience. And we look forward to following all of this up. Goodbye.
Hello everyone, greetings from Rio. My name is Bernardo Strasbourg, and it is a pleasure to be part of the Global Landscapes Forum again. I'd like to talk about ecosystem restoration. A couple weeks ago, we priority areas for ecosystem restoration. We developed and applied a spatial planning framework, Plangeia, to identify priority areas for restoration aiming at maximizing benefits for biodiversity conservation and climate change mitigation, while keeping implementation costs and potential conflicts with agriculture to a minimum. We learned that restoring 30% of converted lands in priority areas can avoid up to 72% of expected species extinctions, while sequestering up to 465 billion tons of CO2. Crucially, we found that restoring priority areas can make restoration 13 times more cost-effective. We look at all ecosystem types globally. Predictably, forests do play a major role, but we found that if we're aiming at multiple benefits, as we probably should, all types of ecosystems have a role to play. Wetlands, for instance, are even more important than forests for these goals. Another key result is that if we improve the way we manage land, we can conserve all remaining natural areas and achieve very ambitious restoration levels without impacting food production. Now, from my experience in following restoration projects on the ground, in particular through the Atlantic Forest Pact, I know there are multiple challenges for implementation. But I have also seen that when people get together, and that's local people, policy people, NGO people, science people, business people, there is no problem we can't solve. I also learned from applying our approach from farm to global scales for governments, investors, and local stakeholder groups, how priorities can and should change according to the local context. It is therefore paramount that we include the preference of all these stakeholders in the restoration plans, taking special care to the most vulnerable ones. One last finding from our study are the massive synergies among the benefits for people, climate, and land conservation and biodiversity, but that we can only capture these synergies if we plan for them from the start. I hope the upcoming landmark conference of the Rio Conventions at the start of the first year of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration can help to realize this potential, as envisioned by all nations on Earth here in my hometown in 1992. Thank you.